Video. No video. And no. We can keep this one. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start our session. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon as well, who is attending online. I'm Magda Larioli, and I lead transport decarbonization efforts at WRI Brazil. It's an honor to be here moderating this session where we're going to discuss fleet renewal for a greener future. So now I'd like to invite to the stage our outstanding group of experts. So I'd like starting inviting Jessica Farmer, Principal Investment Officer in IFC's Global Transportation Infrastructure Investment Department. Welcome, Jessica. I would like also to invite Rakma Kaimuddin, Deputy Coordinating Minister for Basic Infrastructure in Indonesia. Welcome. I'd like to invite Sofia Nadur, Managing Director for Asia and Middle East at BP Ventures. Welcome, Sofia. And I'd like to invite Stafford Vaya, Manager at GreenMax Capital Group. Welcome all. So the transition to the electric fleet is gaining momentum worldwide, but financial and operational barriers still slow down the large-scale adoption. While technology costs are decreasing, cities and operators still face challenges in securing funding, structuring business models, and ensuring the long-term sustainability. In this discussion, we will explore how to unlock the funding for fleet electrification, key lessons from real-world implementation, and actionable steps to accelerate a sustainable transition. So to start, we are going to start bringing this landscape of the financial, and I'd like to start with Jessica. Jessica, IFC plays a key role in financing sustainable infrastructure worldwide. From your experience, what are the main financial barriers cities and operators face when transitioning to electric mobility? Also, what are strategies have been proven effective in mobilizing private sector investment for fleet electrification?
Okay. So from the perspective of cities, I think the barriers are many, and we'll talk about those over the next few days, and even towards the end of the week, we have smaller group discussions. But for a city to consider electrification, there has to be quite a lot of enabling environment already in place, a regulatory environment that favors the implementation of this technology, importation of the equipment, if not a domestic OEM manufacturing production base. So that's a huge element that needs to be thought through. How and where are the incentives to generate that production base? Another capacity we've seen was a limitation, and we've been working on for years with certain cities and really governments to implement across cities in their country is how do you contract this infrastructure? So from a municipal bus perspective, what are the contracts where you would invite operators to come in and to raise capital to bring in electric buses and run those for a number of years, a long-term contract that they would be paid under and could generate financing based on the strength of that contract. So a lot of those concessions either needed to be adapted from what were there in existence with conventional technology, diesel buses or combustion engine technologies updated for electric bus technology. And then from the investor perspective, a consideration is always what is the credit quality of that concessionaire, of that municipal transport authority who's signing, who's the counterparty in contracting those operations from the operators. Are they bankable? Are they creditworthy? Do they have a risk rating, a credit risk rating? And so in cases where they don't, we need to think through how do you mitigate that risk? Either you help get access to ratings or you provide liquidity facilities. So you can see from the municipal planning, I guess another area just quickly I'll mention is the procurement. How do you enable procurement, but at a large enough scale to incentivize the OEM manufacturers to give optimal cost for the tenders that are coming out for the municipals to buy buses that would be at the lowest potential cost? And so the procurement bid processes become very important in trying to gain enough scale, and that they would be managed, properly to a high standard, that there would be adequate opportunity for as many bidders as possible to ensure that you've got a very robust kind of procurement approach. So all of these things, as you can imagine, take time, right? And so there can be months and years of work with these cities, with the municipalities, depending on where they are in that trajectory, getting ready for ultimately procurement and bringing in operators and buses being implemented on the roads. So I think from our perspective at IFC, what we saw in parallel was maybe a quicker moving process to start to get e-buses and e-fleet on the road, is to work with existing private operators who don't need to worry as much about all of the things that I just mentioned a municipality would, and especially working with existing fleets that are already in operation. So you have a large category of asset and lease cos of corporate entities who maintain, very large fleets themselves. Historically, those have been combustion engines, but those are now being incentivized to convert to electric mobility, primarily for reasons of cost, where the costs have come down on battery production and usage when you put them at commercial use. And so corporate entities, asset and lease cos, are really getting the demand from their client base to convert those fleets to electric because of cost savings. And certainly you have added benefits of decarbonization, you've got pollution reduction, you've got noise reduction. So you have a lot of nice benefits that come along with them, but the economics of that are driving. And from a financial investor's perspective, it's much easier to look at a commercial operation that's already ongoing, that's got financial history, that's got balance sheet, and we can simply provide financing for the new technology to come. So we're really looking at both of those things in parallel, knowing that some will move faster while we work on the longer term approaches of assisting the municipalities to get into robust procurement and then electric bus implementation programs.
Thank you, Jessica. Now I will shift to Sophia to hear a little bit about BP Ventures that has been actively increasing in EV-related projects. From your perspective, what makes a project bankable in this sector? And how do you see the role of fleet service companies and startups in accelerating the adoption of electric buses?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure. And this room knows far more than I do. I'm just a practitioner, okay? So BP Ventures is a corporate venture capital arm of BP. We invest in early stage companies, typically Series A. We may put $5 million to $20 million into the company, and then we help that company scale up through different commercial arrangements if possible. In India, we've invested in 3 companies in the mobility space, a company called BlueSmart, a company called Magenta Mobility, and a company called Zingbus. And I'll talk a bit about Zingbus in the second half of the question. So with respect to how do I see a company being bankable? I think there's 3 things. One is, first of all, you need to have what I would call be a disruptor. So I'll give an example. So in India, you had for many years Uber and Ola operating in a ride-hail sector, but they basically just cut and paste the model that works in the Western world, which is you have a lot of excess capacity. People want to make a bit of money for the weekend, so off you go. You get onto this aggregator platform and you match demand and supply. In countries like India, where vehicular penetration is so much lower, we saw this during COVID, where many of the drivers who had the vehicles on Uber and Ola platform literally lost their shirts. They had to hand their cars back because the cars were idle, they were not making any money, and the drivers could not afford the finance costs. Enter a company called BlueSmart, which has a way of ensuring that the drivers don't have to own the vehicles. They have worked out a way to finance those vehicles. The driver takes home at least 30,000 rupees a month, which is a reasonable income for their family. And as well, they manage their charging infrastructure to be able to ensure that they can have all electric vehicles offering ride hail. And that's been quite a disruption. And the key thing is also they've been able to ensure that they've got a very good digital tech stack to match demand and supply. Another area is ensuring you've got good institutional investors on board. We've been one quite early, and I've seen in a company I invested in called Magenta, which is a all-electric fleet logistics solutions provider. We've had Morgan Stanley's Infra Fund co-investing with us, and it's helped immensely around safety, around governance, and around capital structuring. Last but not least, the third area is around being very capital efficient and showing a pathway to profitability ensures that companies can stay for the long term. And we've seen this, like, for instance, again, with BlueSmart, they don't just do ride hail, they do ride share, they do other types of offers to ensure that the vehicles are really well utilized. In the case of the e-bus piece, there's a long tail of owners in India of buses. To try and convert those owners to buy electric buses at twice the price in terms of capex is a real hard ask. Typically, the median fleet size is around 7 buses, so it's a really, really long tail. As well, charging infrastructure is non-existent. So all these plans that having 30,000 plus electric buses on the road in the next few years is not going to happen unless you try and solve for charging infrastructure. So one of the things, I invested in a young Indian company called Zingbus. We put $9 million at the end of last year. They will have 200 e-buses on the road in the next few months. And we've managed to get this company to pair up with Reliance and BP, which has charging infrastructure. So using other people's balance sheets as well to help with getting charging infrastructure, both at hubs and at intermediary stops as well. And that's helped immensely to get this company to encourage bus operators to also go electric, because they can see as well, not just the cost benefits, but the ability to be able to charge and recharge these buses. And also because of their digital tech stack, this young company, which is literally better than Flixbus, has a really good digital tech stack to get bums on seats. Because at the end of the day, you need to make sure that these new business models are sustainable.
Thank you, Sophia. So now I'd like to ask Stafford about GreenMax. GreenMax is working on 2 initiatives: Green for Access First Lost Facility and Green Shift Africa to support e-mobility. Can you describe these programs?
Yes. Can you hear me well? Okay, good. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. I echo the same thoughts. It's great to be up here with such a distinguished panel. A little bit about GreenMax, in case you're not familiar with us. We are an advisory and fund management firm operating in sub-Saharan Africa and emerging markets globally. And so thank you for asking about the Green for Access First Lost Facility, which focuses on the demand side, or the demand challenges of e-mobility, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, right? A lot of East and West Africa is mostly where we are. Our offices in Nairobi and Lagos. And then also the supply side, the challenges we see on the supply side, and the Green Shift Africa, which is a trade finance facility. Also focused on e-mobility, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. So on the demand side, we all know that there's a significant demand for electric vehicles in sub-Saharan Africa, right? East and West Africa. And when I say electric vehicles, I'm mostly talking about bodas or e-motorcycles or e-two-wheelers, depending on which country that you're talking about, right? So significant demand. There are really high upfront costs there, right? And so you're going to hear the same thing probably from a lot of us. There are high upfront costs from boda riders. I just got back from a 2-week trip to Nairobi in October. And I rode several Ubers, boda riders, talking to them. So there are high upfront costs associated with them. They're about 40% higher. And it's not really the frame, it's the battery that costs more, between 30 to 50% more. And so that is a big problem. But as we all know, the total cost, or you may not know, but the total cost of ownership over time is lower, right? And that's fuel. There's petrol savings, right? We talk about Ethiopia's plan and everything they're doing, and I'll talk about that later with the next question. But fuel savings and then maintenance costs as well, right? And so the challenge is, unfortunately, for a lot of these boater riders, the savings, all those total cost of ownership savings, are eaten up by high interest rate loans that they have to take, right? And so that is a big problem for the end users. So to address this, GreenMax came up with the Green for Access First Loss Facility, or G4A, we call it. And so that what it really does is crowd in local financial institutions to offer lower interest rate or more affordable local currency loans to end users. Okay, so G4A is really a risk mitigation tool that covers the first 20% of loss on our portfolio of e-mobility loans. We're working with the IKEA Foundation. They've helped us start a pilot in Kenya, working with a local microfinance institution, Fortune Credit, and a local e-mobility company, Iwaka, and it's allowing Fortune Credit to offer lower interest rate loans to end users. Okay, so let me quickly pivot to the supply side, because I know I'm running out of time. So it's good for demand to equal supply, right? And that's not really what we found was happening. So in 2023, specifically in Kenya, we talked to several asset finance companies, and they were trying to, in this 2023, they were trying to trying to give loans, about 20,000 loans to boater riders in Kenya in 2023. They ended up giving a fraction of that, so about 2,500 loans to boater riders, and the main reason was the supply. Right, so this is all based on the supply side, so it's all coming together, right? And so we asked the e-mobility companies about the main bottlenecks that they're facing, and so the challenge is that they just don't have the cash or the working capital up front, and so that's a big problem. There's a very fragmented, all kinds of different business models, right, all over East and West Africa, and so. The OEMs that they're importing from, hopefully will have more in-country assembly and also manufacturing in the future, but they're importing from Asia require 100% upfront before they will ship, right? And these companies just don't have the working capital to do that. And so that's where, and it's also it's a very nascent sector. These financial institutions are offering, they just don't know the industry that well. And that's just the nature of a nascent sector, the e-mobility in sub-Saharan Africa. So the solution that GreenMax came up with is Green Shift Africa, or GSA, right? Not to be confused with the G4A. And again, I'm happy to talk more about this during the panel, but GreenMax is working with Tradable House Africa, and we developed Green Shift Africa, which is a trade finance facility. And the goal is to leverage the working capital that the e-mobility companies do have to increase the number of EVs that they can import. And so hopefully in the future, you'll see that those 20,000 loans equal, those will go to 20,000 e-motorcycles, right? So that's the goal. So for supply to equal demand. And so, there's a lot more to talk about. And if any questions come up during the panel or after, I'm happy to answer more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Stafford. We have some time after all these questions of the panelists, then we open for the audience. So please, if you have any question, take note. And also, panelists, please feel free also to complement. So we already heard about Jessica and Sophia providing some overview of the challenges that cities are facing and all these initiatives of GreenMax. Now I'd like to shift to the real world, some experience from Indonesia. So I'd like to ask Rahmat. Indonesia is one of the largest vehicle producing countries in Southeast Asia, playing a major role in the national economy. What are the key drivers behind Indonesia's e-fleet transition? How is the government addressing the economic shifts resulting from the transition from internal combustion to electric mobility?
Yeah, thank you, Martha. So, as a context for Indonesia, we are working on several constraints on this one. Obviously, decarbonization, energy transition is good for environment, for the world, but also we have to consider one, automotive sector is currently very important for our economy. We produce about 1.4 million cars every year. play significant percentage in our GDP. We export. So whatever that we want to do, we have to make sure that we need to protect the jobs. The good thing is that transitioning into EVs may bring some economic benefits as well, because today Indonesia import about 60% of the oil. So we are an oil exporting country, and also in the government budget, we subsidize oil, fuel as well. So having ICE operating in Indonesia actually is a constraint for the state budget, constraint for the trade balance, and also create emission and pollution in the country, right? So we need to, I think shifting to EV is very important for us, but we got to make sure that it continues to provide jobs. So what do? We have multiple approach, basically, demand side, supply side, and also in the infra and policy. So initially in the demand side, we basically provide incentives for the purchasers. And the way we try to convince our fiscal agency to give this incentive is just to calculate how much money each buyer would have would have received in fuel subsidy. So just give it upfront. So practically, we actually theoretically even make money by incentivizing shifting to EVs. So that is quite successful, but only successful to increase from 1% market share to 1.7% market share. And then we realized that the other problem is the supply. We don't have enough good vehicles, EV vehicles. And at that time, the incentive we only gave to the cars manufactured in Indonesia. So what we try to do is to attract more and more EV producers in the country. So we have to give them a time to import, and then we waive the import duty and the luxury taxes. So what we did is in 2 years, 2024, 2025, we waive import duty, luxury taxes. Total is about 72.5% if it's coming from certain countries. And what do we ask them to do is they have to produce in Indonesia. And whatever that they import within those time period, let's say they import 100,000 cars in 2 years, they also have to produce 100,000 cars by 2026 and 2027. And they have to put bank guarantee to ensure that they do that. Otherwise, they have to return the fiscal incentive that we give. So that again make our fiscal agency comfortable, because they say we waive 2 years worth of import duty, but we get GDP forever. Kind of those things. And then later on, we also try to do fleet support, governments, for example, government purchase. We put some policies for our government civil servants. They have to use EVs, for example, and state-owned enterprises. But again, I think the key success is to provide affordable cars that is of good quality in the country. And then after that, as our colleagues mentioned in the panel, they'll buy it, and then they know that they're gonna save money afterwards. Yeah. So maybe that is for the first session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hakmak. So it's fascinating all the work that Indonesia is developing. So now I'd like to discuss how the panelists see the future, how to scale and accelerate the e-mobility. So, Jessica, beyond traditional financing, what are the most promising financial instruments available to scale up electric mobility, particularly in emerging markets? And how can multilateral institutions support cities and private operators in accelerating fleet renewal?
Okay. So one of the ideas I have on innovation will be discussed in the next panel by my client who's sitting in the audience. So trying not to steal a lot of her thunder, but We worked with a client who very proudly, for the first time, is working through a sustainability-linked financing. And that is a vehicle which can be utilized for an entity that would document a framework of commitments that they have that will be monitored over the life of the loan, where they can mobilize capital from authorized sustainable linked financiers, and it lowers their cost of capital in exchange for them meeting these objectives. So for us, that is a mechanism that we hope to inspire others, like our wonderful leading client in the industry, to do more of, because it's something that they hold for themselves, and they can raise financing not just with IFC, for example, but any commercial lender who is able to offer this program on a repeat basis under this model. So it's really meant to be an incentive to inspire these companies to continue to do the have the efforts that they're making to decarbonize and to transition to electric fleets, but to then get a benefit for that and having hopefully an easier source of mobilizing capital and then receiving a financial benefit as well, a bit of a financing discount in recognition for those efforts that they're doing. So that's a programmatic approach that we're trying to inspire a number of our corporate entities, and we even have municipal entities that are doing them now. We have green bonds that different municipalities are working forwards now, with the end use of proceeds going to electric bus fleets and charging infrastructures. Again, those financings have certain attributes that bring financing benefits to those that are issuing them. So those are more programmatic. I think in terms of scale, we need to really find ways to scale more capital quickly on the basis of structures. We heard from Chile this morning, but they have really done some innovative work with a financing structure to mobilize capital into almost an intermediary holding company, and then having the existing operations ongoing in their market. But it was a way to produce something that was quite bankable for the investors that would come in and finance those buses, which, as we've heard, they're higher upfront cost, a very large capital infusion of cost, as well as the charging infrastructure. But having a structure in place where the financiers look to that holding company, backed oftentimes by the municipality or state transport, for its primary source of repayment. So we don't have to then get into the underlying risk assessment of the operations of those buses on the ground. Are those bus operators running things appropriately, safely? What are their employment and labor practices? We leave that to the municipality to enforce and to set those rules. So it really enables us to mobilize capital faster and in bigger amounts. And that Chile model should be something that we're looking to replicate in many other jurisdictions as a means to mobilize capital that wants to come in, but that can't get into the underlying analysis of the operations to ensure that it's all being done to those investors' standards of what they would want to adhere to. And we leave that to the local authorities, the local municipalities, to enforce that level of discipline.
Thank you, Jessica. Sophia, looking at the broader investment landscape, what trends do you see emerging in venture capital for e-mobility? Do you see a role for BP Ventures in the bus sector as a financier?
Okay, so in terms of trends, I would say one is air mobility. So air mobility, now don't think this is about moving rich people from place to place. This is specific use cases. So if you think the amount of congested streets, and I've sat in traffic, I've had 3 meetings in a row in Bangalore before I've got to where I need to get to. And you think in terms of the opportunity and to be able to provide another layer, another plane of mobility. There's a company in Chennai called ePlane, which just got $1 billion LOI from the Indian government to move, to create air ambulances. I can't tell you how many air ambulances or how many ambulances have been stuck on roads as have been stuck in traffic. So to provide specific use cases to be able to help people from around the country get to where the health centers are as quick as possible. And I think that's quite an interesting use case and a new form of e-mobility that I see in the future. The other areas linked around to what I've been developing, not just at Ventures. Before I joined BP Ventures, I helped BP develop its global e-mobility program. So we acquired companies, invested, and did JVs in the UK, in China, in Germany, and also in the US. And in China, we did a JV with Didi. So we went and said to Didi, who has a big fleet of EVs, that we could be their charging partner. We now have $1 billion joint venture between Didi and BP, so BP does the charging infrastructure and also ensures that more and more EVs go onto the Didi platform. But the software that was there at the time only enabled the Didi fleet to charge on our charging infrastructure. And that got to around 35% utilization, which is about break even. But we then deployed one of our portfolio companies' technologies, opened up the charging infrastructure to non-Didi drivers, and that's now brought utilization up to 65%. Why I say this is that being able to match demand and supply and do it in a capital efficient way, I think is more and more going to become important as we seek to deploy capital to be able to ensure that the electrification of transport happens at the speed in which we want it to. Last but not least, I think shared mobility will remain a big trend. More and more, as people are getting richer, and India is another case in point, it's destined to be the third richest country on a GDP per capita in the next few years. How do you keep people from buying personal vehicles? You ensure that there's enough shared mobility available and ensure there's good quality, many options. And that happens across the developing world. And so for me, I think more and more, if we can have more innovation in shared mobility, it will help endlessly to ensure that the electrification transport is sustainable and sticks.
Thank you.
So last comment was around, does BP do financing? Well, we're an energy company, so will we be asset owner for buses? Like I said, in this little company we've invested in, indirectly we are for a period of time. But what we're trying to do is to prove this business model, de-risk the business area for people in this room to be able to then provide more, let's say, smarter capital to be able to build out the infrastructure. Like I said, I'm also using other people's balance sheets. I'm using the JV with Reliance and BP to help with charging infrastructure because they know how to build, like they have built safe gas stations around the world. They know how to build safe charging stations. So, but there'll be a need as well for financing. So our job, I think, is to provide that initial seed, but also ensure that a lot of these models are de-risks and can be sustainable over time.
That's great. Thank you. Now, Stafford, from your perspective, what are the key barriers to scaling electric mobility in public transport, particularly for buses and 2-3-wheelers? Based on your experience, what recommendations would you give to international organizations like the World Bank and public officials to accelerate the transition?
Okay, thank you. So, as I was discussing before, there were several challenges that we were trying to address, right, with the two facilities that we talked about. So in addition to those challenges, right, we do see a lack of favorable e-mobility policies and just a fragmented e-mobility policy structure around East and West Africa and all over Sub-Saharan Africa. So that is something that is getting a lot better, actually, but and I think the World Bank and other development banks are certainly doing a great job with that and helping those countries. And so that is a big problem, and it causes a lot of fragmentation. However, there have been a fair amount of successes, and I wanted to highlight a few of those in this area. So, like for Rwanda, for example, all of their new buses are going to have to be electric, right? So that's one good thing. All of their newly registered e-motorcycles starting in 2025 are going to have to be electric, right? Just to be registered, right? So that's a big deal. Probably the biggest deal is in Ethiopia, what we've seen, that they were the first country to stop the import of non-EVs right? And so I have a few statistics here that I think are really important. So yeah, the first country to do that, they're seeing 100,000 imports per month. Right now, they're hoping to see up to 300,000 or 500,000 per month in the future. They have tax incentives. The value-added tax has gone away, right, to help with that. Import duties, like we've heard on the panel. Also, I think a lot of it in Ethiopia has to do with the cost of fuel imports, right? They're a huge fuel importing country. They've spent $6.3 billion in 2023 on fuel imports, right? So it's a huge incentive for them to move in this direction. A company, Dodai, in Japan, has started local assembly in Ethiopia. This is just a really good use case. And then the big challenge there is the charging stations in Addis. There just aren't many, but there's 300 government-backed charging stations that Dodai is working on. And over the next 3 to 5 years, the government plans an additional 3,000 in Addis. So it's a really, really big deal. I think the change in fiscal regimes from administration to administration it can be a problem. We've seen this a little bit in Kenya, where the value-added tax was zeroed out for lithium-ion batteries and e-motorcycles. But then there was, I think it was the summer of last year, 2024, where there was a bill that was considering taking that back to the regular 16%, right? And so we'll see how that plays out. So administration to administration changes, lack of charging infrastructure and investment, and then also patient capital. We need like infrastructure type capital with lower returns and not quite VC returns, right? And we need longer, like 5 to 10 year loans versus the typical maximum of 5-year loans, which is typical in sub-Saharan Africa. So that needs to change. And as far as the actual recommendations, we think that technical assistance, which is something the bank does well, to commercial banks and other microfinance institutions or MFIs will be really, really helpful. It's a very nascent sector, as I've said before. We want to make sure that these MFIs and commercial banks and financial institutions understand the sector. And if they do understand the sector, then perhaps they'll be able to mitigate it better, right? And perhaps some of the risks that they think are inherent risk are actually non-factual, right? So the more they know, I think the technical assistance can be a really big driver of adoption. And let me just say lastly, we've seen the RBF results-based financing be a really big deal and really successful in mini grids and energy access all over sub-Saharan Africa. I was just working on a project in Lesotho actually for the past year that was MDB funded. And so we think that we're starting to see RBF programs spill over into the e-mobility space. Right. And so that's a really good thing. So if you have if you have an e-motorcycle that's 40% more than its ICE counterpart, then perhaps the RBF can come in and fill that void. Right. And so some of the key metrics that you would use maybe in an RBF type facility would be like CO2 emissions, the number of adoptions, the number of jobs created, both indirectly, and also maybe like a gender-based metric that you could use. So yeah, there's some of the ways that, so it's a long answer. There's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of things that the bank and other multilateral development banks can do to help and are doing to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Stafford. Thank you for giving all this overview of how GreenMax is acting in Africa. So before I ask Rakmak, I would like to invite who has questions. So please feel free to stand the line. And then after that, we can open for questions. And also who is online can also write on the chat. So now, Rakmak, Transjakarta, it's one of the largest BRT networks in the world. It aims to be 100% electrified by 2030. Based on Jakarta's experience, what are the key strategies the government must adopt to successfully achieve this target? Beyond electrification, what other technologies is the government of Indonesia considering for decarbonizing the transport sector?
Yeah, thank you. So the Transjakarta story is actually quite close to my heart because it is the maybe largest bus operator in the country. but the director is actually my high school friend, so high school classmate. So let me just tell you a story. All right, basically, I was leading the energy transition, electrification in the country. He was operating buses. And I told him at the time, like, look, why don't you try to electrify? It's probably good for your fleet, your economics, and whatnot. And the first thing he told me is, Rahmat, I'm a public operator. My KPI are two things. One, reliability. Two is economics. And EV bus costs twice as much. I said, look, have you calculate in the per kilometer basis and the TCO level? Because Transjakarta actually pays per kilometer. They don't buy the bus, right? The operators buy. So that basically end up, like, we spend about 6 months dissecting what is possible to cut costs and whatnot. But in short, we realized a couple of things. One, apparently Transjakarta initially overspec the bus, so the cost is quite high, and they don't need to do that because they actually know how many kilometers exactly, they know the routes. They don't need that big a battery, and therefore the cost can be lowered. And also we need to ensure that the contract need to be modified a little bit, provide security for the operators so they can get good financing. But in the end of the day, just by little tweaks, we could actually get bids about a few percentage point lower than the full ICE bus. So towards the end, he basically in 2024, all the new fleets that he bought is all EVs. Because when he tendered it, the price actually is cheaper than ICE, even though the diesel fuel in Indonesia, especially for public sector, is heavily subsidized, about 60% subsidy. And even that is still cheaper. So I think that is quite important to look into that. And of course, having the other strategies that we thought about is trying to lower the cost of financing. That is something that would love to see more. One of the things that he mentioned to me is, Rahmat, if you just buy my carbon credit, even for $1, I will consider doing this. So I was about to pick my pocket and give him $1, but at the time. So, but bottom line, I think carbon credit for transport need to be considered, at least in some countries where they don't face the same challenges. We are quite lucky to have like a full support of the government and also our power company to build infra. But some of that is quite important. Now, what are other strategies beyond electrification? Today, because electrification will take some time, we are also looking at biofuel technology. We happen to be blessed with palm oil in Indonesia, being in the tropical country. So we mix it. But again, in the end of the day, we believe that potentially the EVs is the end game for this. Of course, until we see other technology that is better.
Thank you. So now I would like to invite the people in the audience, please, your name, and if you have a direct question or it's more of...
Sure. The fleet renewal requires that all the operators, they come into play so that it can be faster. And in most of the urban areas, these small operators, they are mostly take more transportation than the large public operators. So I want to ask the panel, my first question is then how they're tackling with this, what they are offering to these small operators. Not only buses, but until paratransit, we have different categories. The second thing is the cost, upfront cost, we discuss a lot. So the life cost analysis shows that it can be beneficial. What is the experience of Indonesia in that? These are two questions from my side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I comment?
Yes,
So-
yes, please go ahead.
So you probably know, especially with small operators, trying to then finance these electric buses, for instance, the financing terms are generally poorer because of unfamiliarity, new form factors, etc. So one of the things that this little company, which we've invested in, and I'm not promoting it, it's just an example. This little company it's now going to guarantee to the lender a specific IRR, and that helps to reduce the overall cost of capital for that little mom and pop, but average 3 to 5 to 7 buses. So it's really looking at it from an ecosystem perspective. How do you get that transition to happen? Yeah, so that's one comment. You can be a little bit more creative on encouraging better financing terms to encourage that, and why they can do that is because their technology gets more and more bums on seats, so guarantees and get certain rides and get certain revenue per bus, per route, etc. So they can sort of harmonize then what they expect their revenue to be, and to then help then the owners be more confident to actually transition.
I was going to add to this that one of the ways that we're working on is to use the asset and lease co model, where you can have this intermediary, right? They exist already. We're working in certain jurisdictions to create them, but they mobilize the capital, buy the buses up front, pay the higher upfront cost, but then they lease the buses on a monthly basis to the underlying operators. And the electric vehicles, when put into commercial use like this, are usually lower cost because you're offsetting the fuel, and then the operations and maintenance are lower. So it comes at a cost savings to the underlying operator. They're able to lease that vehicle for a number of years and then turn it back generally to the asset and lease cos who remarkets it, and they get a new upgraded vehicle for the next subsequent contract period. So we're really trying to use that intermediary approach of the asset and lease co so that every mom and pop doesn't need to come out and try to get financing. And we have a very hard time as financiers looking at each of their underlying economics. So this intermediary is very effective. It's what's happening already for the ICE vehicles.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, when I was talking about the supply side, right? We're talking exactly about the asset finance companies, and that's exactly what they're doing, is being the intermediary, right? And they just don't have access to the supply that they need right now in sub-Saharan Africa specifically, but there are endless. If you all have studied sub-Saharan Africa and e-mobility, there are endless business models, right? So you have the e-mobility companies themselves that are doing fleets, or doing to Bodas, or doing to Uber, right? But then you do have the intermediaries as well. In Kenya, several asset finance companies that are trying to do the same thing. So they're working on it. Yeah.
One will be here tomorrow.
What?
There's one, Basigo, is coming tomorrow.
Basigo, of course. Yeah, the e-bus company in Kenya, right?
Yeah, for the experience in Jakarta, yeah. Before Transjakarta, we have a lot of multiple operators, and they are entrepreneurs. So basically, yeah, they operate, they wait until their bus is full, and then they go, and it becomes a mess. So once the Transjakarta come, basically they embrace all these small operators, and they give them the contract. So you just need to move so many times, and regardless it's full or not, they'll pay you per kilometer, and that basically help support the business model become clearer. People can get cheaper funding, and of course they can control the standard. That is one of the solutions, at least in Transjakarta in Indonesia. So as a result, then they can kind of drive the technology. They say, this is what I want and what is the price, right? For others, at least, we start looking also in ride-hailing. Indonesia is actually quite big, ride-hailing. We have Gojek and Grab operating in the country, maybe about 1 million vehicles, 1 million cars actually, right now registered, and they start also using EVs. Some of them is actually bought by the company and then they rent it out to their drivers. Because for Indonesia, at least in the case, I think similar in other countries, EVs is just much more efficient, energy efficient. And therefore, the cost to operate daily is probably about only 20% of if you buy subsidized gasoline in Indonesia. So I think the challenge for us is to convince people to use it. And once they use it, they know that they're actually going to save money.
Thank you. Next question. Please.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I am Jean, and I'm an independent because I'm unemployed. And I'm sure there is a lot of people out there who are unemployed because of the current situation. My question relates to that. In situation where non-profits and academicians may not necessarily rely on the government to continue doing the work of behavioral science, for example, in road safety, because they have shortage of funds. How is that now influencing the corporate strategies and the way they see social responsibility and common shared value so that the work around behavioral science can keep on going?
Okay. Maybe like we are discussing more like financing mechanism experience from like cities and countries to renew their fleet. We are not like right now here discussing this scenario.
Maybe I didn't make my question a bit clear. I think there is a relationship between that and what is being discussed right now. For example, in terms of, we all know, for example, when we had a smartphone for the first time in the world and how we were all very happy about it. And the way we saw many behaviors being influenced over time because of the smartphone. Same happens to the vehicles. And I think the work of researching how, for example, the electric vehicles work, how people operate them, how they interact with them, what are the risks around, are the behaviors going in the positive direction or the negative direction? The gentleman over there explained the case in Rwanda, for example, where I am from. And I see maybe, for example, issues in how people use the helmets, for example, and the way people interact with the P2W vehicles. And I think the work in terms of behavior around those areas is also important to, keep on researching and keep on supporting. But and I think in situation like this, corporates have a big share to provide.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm just getting note of all the questions, and then we are going to address.
Should I go?
Yeah, go.
Hi, I'm Daniel Pulido, lead transfer specialist for the World Bank covering Europe and Central Asia. Thank you very much for the interesting presentations and examples. My question is related to trucks. I mean, you share examples of innovative financing for high utilization cases, such as ride-hailing and buses, of course. And that's where a lot of the attention has been so far. But I wanted to know if you have any interesting examples or cases for the financing of fleet renewals for trucks, and what do you see as emerging trends there, things that we should look for? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The last question, then we are going to address all the questions.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Taylor Reich of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. I have a question, especially about buses and perhaps especially for Rashmat. So this morning, Juan Carlos of Chile talked about how electric buses are more attractive to passengers in many ways. And we've seen in ITDP how better data and more comfortable buses without even any changes to service attract more riders. Is this phenomenon sufficiently well documented that you're able to use it in TCO calculations when you're assessing the amount of revenue that these new buses might bring in? And if not, is there anything we can do to help? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have like 3 questions. The first one, if anyone can comment about how this transition to e-mobility can guarantee this just transition and that everybody is don't get unemployed. And then related to trucks, if you have any examples, and then the last one to Rahman.
Can I comment on the trucks comment? Topic of my heart. Okay, so we invested in a company called Magenta Mobility, which is a EV logistics fleet in India, because I believe that especially places like India, which is moving billions and billions of goods every single day along congested roads, it has to electrify that segment as well. But again, it's not that different in terms of TCO and all the challenges for fleet managers to want to switch to electric. But so we've invested in this company along with Morgan Stanley, and we managed to procure 3,500 trucks of different sizes. So some of it are last mile, so 3-wheelers, but now with more product available in India, we've switched to bigger trucks, so four-wheel trucks to help at mid-mile. And we're seeing an explosion now of once you've proven out the business model, once the e-commerce companies, because they don't care about sustainability, they will tell you that ESG is important, but actually is the cost of courier these items is what they really care about. So you've got to have a really efficient operations and digitalize as much as possible to make sure that you can actually have something sustainable. And we're at the point where this little company, which we started off small, is at the point of profitability. And that's a very, very rare occasion, but that's a function of the vehicle types that are coming from the production lines in India, but also just very, very tight management of operations and sweating those assets. So they're now at 1.5 shifts and 85% utilization. So really understanding economics can really encourage more and more facility managers to switch.
I was going to add quickly to Daniel, we're financing one too. We're about to announce close. We can talk after this, but 55-ton trucks also in India. It's a bit of a pilot to kind of prove to our own financial committees that it works, but we're doing several hundred in the pilot, and the company has 10,000 in demand behind it, and that's just one company. So same thing as Sophia was mentioning, it's a cost savings for this company to be using ICE. So they came to our operator with the proposal, and we're looking to finance. So it'll be our first very large electric truck finance globally.
Thank you. So Rahman, for the last one.
Hopefully once you finish with India, please come to Indonesia. We are quite behind on trucks, more on the light duty. For e-bus, to be frank, we have not put this in the impact at that time. We are purely focusing on the economics. Quite happy to see. The only anecdotes we said is that if you don't believe the benefit of e-bus, please ride motorbike behind a combustion engine diesel, and then you'll know exactly the benefit. People who have been in Jakarta and probably India will know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, so, and of course, about jobs, given this is a new technology, I believe there will be plenty of opportunities for research, for studies, and there's a lot of NGOs that is currently supporting us. As case in point, our last gentleman as well. So hopefully you can speak with those think tanks on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan, do you have something about trucks or?
I was going to talk about our friend from Rwanda talking about the awareness, right, is a huge issue. And I'm not sure if I'm getting to your point or not, but yeah, I mean, just the education and awareness is a really big driver. And people just don't understand, the new technology, right? So we're talking sub-Saharan Africa, right? So it is really, really important. And then I would say also about trucks. I mean, you're going to start to see in the urban areas e-mobility in sub-Saharan Africa, but it's starting to go into three-wheelers, right? Out into the agricultural areas, and then you're starting to get into trucks as well. So there are very, very important agribusiness, right, uses for E3-wheelers and E4-wheelers all over rural sub-Saharan Africa, and so over time it'll get there. Yeah, it's moving in the right direction.
I just said
Yeah.
for ITDB, I would love to see a study like that. So we anecdotally mention this to our credit committees, but I don't know that they put a lot of stock. And for them to put credit in this, they like to see a data point, right? So an assessment. So anything you could do, or the gentleman from Uganda, I think. These studies are very important to financiers who have a concept that this could be the case, but we like to see it based in kind of reality of, hard data. So anything, we love to have these kinds of support.
Thank you. Thank you all for all these valuable insights. We have heard about innovative financial models, policy frameworks, business models that cities are adopting. So thank you all. Thank you all the audience. If you have any other questions, please reach out the panelists. Now we have a coffee break in 20 minutes. We'll be back here. Thank you all.